Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're really digging into Peter Joseph's Revolution Now, episode 55.
Yeah, we've got his analysis right here.
And our plan, really, is to pull out the main threads of his argument, about inequality in America today and the systems he thinks are, well, keeping it in place.
Right. Trying to get past the sort of surface noise and see the structures he's talking about.
Exactly. Give everyone a clearer picture.
And it's interesting, he kicks off by referencing JFK's civil rights speech from '63.
Yeah, that's a powerful starting point.
It really is. Kennedy was laying out some, well, pretty undeniable facts back then about the gaps for African Americans.
Like life expectancy.
Yeah, life expectancy, education quality, economic chances, just stark differences.
So it grounds the whole thing in this deep historical context right away.
Absolutely. And that sets up Joseph's main argument, doesn't it?
It does. He's basically saying, look, okay, maybe the really obvious, overt segregation signs are gone.
Legally, yeah.
Legally. But the underlying inequality, the stuff Kennedy talked about, and what Joseph calls state violence, he argues that hasn't disappeared.
It's just changed form, become maybe more subtle.
Exactly. More subtle, harder to pin down sometimes. And he argues there are these specific beliefs, ways of thinking.
He calls them toxic beliefs.
Right, toxic beliefs that actually help hide this ongoing reality. They make it harder to see and harder to challenge.
Okay, so let's get into these toxic beliefs, ideas that he says prop up these damaging social structures.
The first big one he tackles is the myth of meritocracy.
Yes. The classic American dream narrative.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
You know, the idea that if you just work hard enough, show enough talent, you'll succeed. Simple as that.
Sounds fair on the surface, right?
Totally. That's the appeal. But Joseph's counter is that this completely ignores, well, reality for a lot of people. Meaning it ignores the huge structural barriers, like the wealth you're born into or not born into, your race, your gender, all these things that give some people a massive head start and hold others back.
Right. It's not an even playing field to begin with.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And he talks about how this myth gets reinforced, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's interesting. Like the media focus on those, rags to riches exceptions.
Exactly, the outliers. And while those stories can be inspiring,
Sure.
Joseph argues that focusing so much on them sends this subtle message. See? Anyone can do it. And that kind of lets the system off the hook.
It shifts the focus away from the systemic problems that affect the majority.
Precisely. And the psychological impact, he points out, is, well, kind of damaging.
How so?
Because when people inevitably struggle or don't achieve that dream success,
They blame themselves.
yeah, they internalize it. I didn't work hard enough. I wasn't good enough. Instead of looking outward and saying, hang on, maybe the system itself is rigged against me.
So it turns a structural issue into a personal failing.
That's the core of his point there, I think.
Okay, so that leads kind of naturally into the next toxic belief he talks about, right? The whole rhetoric around anti-DEI and anti-affirmative action.
Yeah, it connects directly.
Right.
Because if you believe purely in meritocracy, then things like DEI might seem unnecessary or even unfair.
What are the typical arguments he highlights there?
Well, the common claim is that these programs, diversity, equity, inclusion, affirmative action, are actually the real discrimination.
Against whom?
Usually framed as being against the majority,
Yeah.
often specifically white men, that they're being unfairly disadvantaged by these policies.
Right, you hear that argument a lot these days.
You do. And Joseph puts in this really stark example, a quote from a KKK leader back in 1982.
Wow, okay.
And what's kind of chilling is how the logic used back then sounds eerily similar to some anti-DEI arguments now.
So he's saying it's not a new argument at all, it's just been repackaged.
That seems to be his point. It's an old argument used to fight against efforts to level the playing field.
And his response to the claim that, say, white men are systemically disadvantaged now.
He's pretty blunt. The data just isn't there.
He says they still hold most of the power.
Yeah, disproportionate wealth, access to the best education, top jobs, political influence. The numbers, he argues, tell a very different story than the rhetoric.
So the danger in that rhetoric, as Joseph sees it,
is that it completely flips justice on its head.
how do you mean?
It takes attempts to fix past and present oppression and frames those attempts as the new oppression.
Okay. So trying to create more fairness is painted as being unfair to the historically dominant group.
Exactly. It ignores the whole historical context of why these initiatives might be needed in the first place.
He draws a parallel to separate but equal.
Yeah, that's a really sharp comparison he makes.
Explain that a bit.
Well, the separate but equal doctrine sounded maybe plausible to some people at the time. Okay, separate facilities, but they're equal.
But in reality, it was never equal. It was designed to maintain segregation and inequality.
Precisely. And Joseph argues these modern beliefs, the pure meritocracy myth, the anti-DEI stuff, they work in a similar way. They might sound reasonable on the surface.
Just treat everyone the same.
Right. But their actual effect, he says, is to protect the existing inequalities, just dressed up in the language of fairness.
That's a strong claim.
It is. So after dissecting these beliefs, Joseph kind of zooms out, looking at the bigger picture of America today.
And he sees a trend towards authoritarianism. That sounds alarming.
It does, and he connects it directly to the economic system.
How so?
He talks about this business-run ethos. Like the main goal of the state isn't really public welfare anymore. It's maximizing profit, helping corporations, and keeping the existing power structures in place.
And he sees signs of this everywhere.
That's his argument. He gives several examples, like environmental policy.
Rolling back protections.
Yeah. He argues it's a straight trade-off. Fossil fuel profits prioritized over, a livable planet or public health.
Okay, what else?
The weakening of social safety nets. He sees that as deliberate, not accidental.
Undermining support systems.
Right. And at the same time, cracking down on dissent. Labeling protesters as unpatriotic or subversive.
Creating a chilling effect on free speech.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it.
Yeah.
Which is, a classic feature of more authoritarian regimes.
He also mentions pressure on universities.
Right, maybe discouraging research or teaching that challenges the status quo. And the media, too.
A less independent media, less critical.
Potentially, yeah. Limiting the range of voices and information people get access to.
And then there's the surveillance and deportation stuff he points out.
Yeah, that's pretty disturbing. The normalization of mass surveillance, even targeting citizens, and aggressive deportation. He draws parallels to how totalitarian states operate.
Wow, so it's quite a bleak picture.
It is, but he argues it's not just, like, random bad things happening.
He sees it as a logical outcome.
Yeah. The result of combining this particular economic ideology, neoliberalism, focused solely on profit, with these underlying authoritarian tendencies. One feeds the other, in his view.
Okay, so if that's the diagnosis, does he offer any prognosis or solutions? Where does he see things going?
He touches on that briefly. He mentions he's working on a white paper and a book later on.
To lay out an alternative.
Seems like it. A more detailed plan for redesigning society, basically.
And there was something about a simulation.
Yeah, simulation and engagement platform linked to his next film, Zeitgeist Requiem.
Interesting. What's the goal there, do you think?
The emphasis seems to be on creating systems that are bottom-up, not top-down.
So grassroots level.
Yeah, and globally scalable, aiming for ways to govern ourselves that are genuinely sustainable and equitable, built from the ground up.
So looking beyond traditional power structures.
It seems to be the direction.
Okay, so if we pull all this together, the toxic beliefs, the authoritarian trend, the future plans, what's the main goal of this specific article, this episode he did?
I think it's really a systems-level diagnosis. He's trying to show how all these pieces fit together.
The propaganda, the flawed reasoning.
Yeah, relying on anecdotes instead of looking at the big picture, the ideological justifications, how all that works to keep structural violence, inequality and harm locked in place.
So it's history, current events, power analysis.
Exactly. Historical examples, modern parallels, the economic roots of power, and then pointing towards, okay, what could we do about it?
Right. And he mentions that upcoming interview with Lee Camp, too, right?
Yeah, and Camp's new show, Unredacted Tonight, sounds like it'll be hitting similar themes, but maybe with more satire and short political critique.
Okay, so wrapping this up, the core message we took from this deep dive into Joseph's piece is...
It's really a challenge, isn't it? To look past the easy answers, the individual story.
Well, those are important too.
Of course, but to see the bigger systemic patterns of inequality and to be critical about narratives that sound fair or logical.
But might actually be masking some really old injustices.
Exactly. Yeah. Recognizing how those seemingly reasonable arguments can prop up unfair systems.
Which leaves us with a final thought for our listeners.
Yeah, building on Joseph's point.
Yeah.
What else out there? What other ideas that feel like just common sense?
Might actually be hiding deeper inequalities. Things we just accept without questioning.
Right. Maybe take a moment to think about issues you see day to day. What's the history there? What are the systemic forces at play?
And how does the language we use shape how we even understand the problem?
Definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.